Rain pelted the empty streets of downtown as Sarah hurried home from her second shift at the diner. The icy November wind cut through her thin jacket, a painful reminder that she couldn't afford a proper winter coat even after picking up extra hours. Her paycheck from both jobs would barely cover this month's rent, let alone Christmas presents for her younger siblings. Sarah clutched her purse tighter, counting the meager tips she'd earned. $23. Not even enough for groceries to last the week. Her shoulders slumped as she rounded the corner, eyes fixed on the cracked sidewalk ahead. That's when she saw him. An elderly man huddled in the doorway of an abandoned storefront, shivering violently as the rain soaked through his tattered clothes. Most people walked past without a glance, as if he were invisible. Sarah knew that feeling all too well, the sensation of being unseen, forgotten by a world too busy to care. She hesitated. Logic told her to keep walking. She had her own problems, her own empty refrigerator waiting at home. But something about the man's eyes, penetrating, intelligent, yet filled with a profound sadness, made her stop. "Sir?" Sarah's voice was barely audible over the rain. "Are you okay?" The man looked up, surprise crossing his weathered face. When was the last time someone had actually spoken to him? "I'm fine, miss," he replied, his voice unexpectedly cultured despite his appearance. "Just waiting out the storm." Sarah glanced at the darkening sky. "This isn't letting up anytime soon. Do you have somewhere to go?" A slight shake of his head was the only answer. Sarah bit her lip, her mind racing. What she was considering was crazy, dangerous even. Her tiny apartment barely had room for her and her two siblings. But letting this man freeze to death seemed unthinkable. "I live just 3 blocks from here," she found herself saying. "It's not much, but you could get warm, maybe have some soup." The man studied her face, as if searching for an ulterior motive. "Why would you help a stranger?" Sarah shrugged. "Because someone once helped me when I needed it most." After a moment's hesitation, the man stood, revealing himself to be taller than she expected. "Thank you," he said simply. "My name is Edward." "I'm Sarah," she replied, offering a small smile. As they walked together through the rain, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was something unusual about this man. His posture, his articulate speech, the way his eyes seemed to catalogue everything around them with sharp precision, it all suggested someone very different from the homeless person his appearance suggested. What Sarah couldn't know was that Edward Williams was actually Edwin Whitmore III, CEO of Whitmore Enterprises, worth over $3.4 billion. The company that had, ironically, closed the factory where Sarah's mother had worked for 15 years before being laid off without severance. Edwin had been conducting his annual reality check a week, living on the streets, something he'd done every year since founding his company. It kept him grounded, he believed, and connected to the real world that executives in his position so easily forgot. But this year was different. A hostile takeover attempt had forced him to extend his experiment, to remain missing while his trusted board members handled the crisis. 3 weeks on the streets had stripped away his usual confident demeanor, leaving him genuinely cold, hungry, and, for the first time, truly vulnerable. Sarah's tiny apartment came into view, a rundown building with crumbling brick and security bars on the windows. She led Edward up 3 flights of stairs, apologizing for the broken elevator. "It's been out of service for months," she explained, slightly out of breath. "Landlord says it's too expensive to fix." When she opened her apartment door, the warm air inside was a welcome relief from the bitter cold. The space was small but meticulously clean, with mismatched furniture that had clearly been collected from thrift stores and sidewalk giveaways. What struck Edward most, however, were the books, hundreds of them, stacked on makeshift shelves, piled beside the couch, arranged carefully on the windowsill. "Sarah!" A young girl's voice called out. "Is that you?" "It's me, Lily," Sarah answered, helping Edward remove his soaked coat. "And we have a guest." A girl of about 13 appeared from one of the bedrooms, her eyes widening at the sight of Edward. Behind her peeked a boy no older than 8, clutching a worn stuffed elephant. "This is Edward," Sarah explained, her voice gentle but firm. "He's going to dry off and have some dinner with us tonight." The children stared, clearly accustomed to their sister's random acts of kindness, if somewhat surprised by this particular one. "Hi," Lily finally said, her voice cautious but not unkind. "I'm Lily, and this is Max." Edward nodded politely. "It's very nice to meet you both." Sarah gestured toward the bathroom. "You can clean up in there. I'll find some dry clothes. They were my dad's, might be a bit small, but they are clean." Left alone in the tiny bathroom, Edward stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror. 3 weeks of living rough had transformed him from the polished executive whose face graced the cover of Business Weekly to this haggard stranger. His silver hair, usually precisely cut, hung in matted clumps. His designer stubble had become a full beard, streaked with dirt. Only his eyes remained unchanged, sharp, observant, missing nothing. He thought about Sarah, who had so little yet offered what she had without hesitation. About the children who accepted a stranger in their home because they trusted their sister's judgment. About the stark contrast between their world and the one he typically inhabited. The irony wasn't lost on him. His company's philosophy, printed in every annual report, was elevating communities through economic opportunity. Yet here was Sarah, working 2 jobs and still struggling to keep her family afloat. Here were children living in an apartment with unreliable heat and a broken elevator. What good were his billions if people like Sarah remained invisible? When Edward emerged from the bathroom, freshly showered and dressed in clothes that indeed strained against his broader frame, he found Sarah in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup that filled the apartment with a savory aroma. "It's just vegetable soup," she apologized. "I was planning to stretch it for a couple of days, but there's plenty to share." Edward's stomach growled in response. After weeks of dumpster diving and occasional charity meals, homemade soup, even simple vegetable soup, seemed like a feast. "It smells wonderful," he said sincerely. As they ate around a small table with mismatched chairs, Edward listened as the children talked about their day. Lily had received an A on her science project. Max had been chosen to feed the class pet, a responsibility he took very seriously. Their normalcy, their resilience in the face of obvious hardship, struck Edward deeply. "What about you, Sarah?" he asked during a lull in conversation. "You mentioned 2 jobs." Sarah nodded, suddenly looking much older than her 24 years. "Diner during the day, cleaning offices at night. The office job is better, no one's there to bother me, and I can listen to audiobooks while I work." She gestured to the books around them. "I'm trying to finish my degree online, 1 class at a time. Business administration." "That's impressive," Edward said, meaning it. "What do you hope to do with your degree?" Sarah's eyes lit up, revealing a passion that hardship hadn't extinguished. "Start my own business someday. Nothing fancy, maybe a bookstore cafe. A place where people can read and connect and not feel rushed to leave." "The world needs more places like that," Edward replied, thinking of his own company's sterile corporate offices, where efficiency was valued above all else. After dinner, Sarah insisted Edward take her bed while she slept on the couch. Despite his protests, she remained firm. "You'll need a good night's sleep if you're going to figure out your next steps," she said. "Besides, I sleep on the couch half the time anyway, when I'm up late studying." As Edward lay in Sarah's bed that night, staring at the ceiling where she had pasted glow in the dark stars in constellations he recognized from his own childhood obsession with astronomy, he made a decision. Tomorrow, he would end his reality check experiment. He would return to his company, to his position of power and influence. But this time, he would return changed. Sarah's kindness, offered without expectation of return, given despite her own desperate circumstances, had awakened something in him that decades of success had buried. A memory of purpose beyond profit, of connection beyond transactions. Edwin Whitmore III, billionaire CEO, fell asleep planning how he could repay a debt that Sarah didn't even know she was owed, a debt not measured in dollars, but in dignity, in opportunity, in justice. What Edwin didn't realize was that this encounter would change not just Sarah's life, but his own, in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. The payment for kindness would indeed come, but it would flow in both directions, transforming everyone it touched. And as rain continued to pelt the windows of the tiny apartment, Sarah slept on the worn couch, unaware that the homeless man she had rescued was about to rescue her in return, not with charity, but with something far more valuable: recognition of her worth. The storm outside intensified, a perfect metaphor for the changes brewing in both their lives. By morning, the rain would stop, the clouds would part, and a new day would dawn, one that would set both Sarah and Edwin on collision courses with destinies neither could have predicted. As Edwin drifted off to sleep, one thought circled in his mind: sometimes the most valuable payment isn't what you receive, but what you're finally able to give. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains, casting a golden glow across the small bedroom. Edwin awoke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where he was. The unfamiliar ceiling with its glow in the dark stars gradually brought back memories of the previous night: the rain, the unexpected kindness, the humble meal shared around a crowded table. For 3 weeks, he had woken on cold concrete or in crowded shelters. This morning, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine gratitude. The apartment was quiet save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and distant traffic outside. Edwin rose carefully, noticing Sarah had laid out a clean towel and a new toothbrush still in its packaging. Such a small gesture, yet it spoke volumes about her character. When he emerged from the bathroom, he found Sarah in the kitchen, already dressed in her diner uniform, quietly preparing lunches for her siblings. "Good morning," she said with a tired smile. "Did you sleep okay?" "Better than I have in weeks," Edwin replied honestly. "Thank you." Sarah waved away his thanks. "Coffee?" she offered, holding up a chipped mug. "It's not fancy, but it's hot." Edwin accepted the mug gratefully, watching as Sarah moved efficiently around the small kitchen, preparing breakfast while simultaneously checking Lily's homework and reminding Max about gym class. The choreography of her morning routine revealed years of practice, of shouldering responsibilities far beyond her years. "Do you have plans for today?" Sarah asked, spreading peanut butter on bread that Edwin noticed was nearing its expiration date. "You're welcome to stay here while I'm at work if you need more time to figure things out." The offer touched Edwin deeply. Here was someone who had nothing to spare, yet was willing to share what little she had without question. "Actually," Edwin said carefully, "I think it's time for me to head back to my life." He paused, choosing his words deliberately. "I've been away long enough." Something in his tone made Sarah look up, her eyes searching his face. For a brief moment, Edwin wondered if she somehow sensed there was more to his story than he'd revealed. "Well, You're welcome to use our shower anytime, she said finally. And if you need help finding resources, I know a few places that might be able to help with job placement. Edwin nodded, touched by her continued concern. I appreciate that more than you know. The morning chaos intensified as Lily and Max emerged from their room, rushing to grab breakfast before school. Edwin found himself drawn into their routine, helping Max find his missing homework while Sarah braided Lily's hair. For a moment, he felt part of something real and vital, a stark contrast to the artificial politeness of board meetings and charity galas. After the children left for school, escorted by a neighbor who took them along with her own kids, Sarah gathered her things for work. I have to go now, she said, handing Edwin a spare key. Lock up if you leave. If you're still here when I get back, maybe we can figure out next steps. With that, she was gone, hurrying down the stairs to catch her bus, leaving Edwin alone in the apartment that revealed so much about her, character books showcasing her aspirations, carefully mended clothes speaking to her resourcefulness, family photos highlighting what she valued most. Edwin moved to the window, watching as Sarah crossed the street below, her slender figure soon disappearing around a corner. Only then did he retrieve his burner phone from the depths of his ragged backpack, the emergency lifeline he'd carried but hadn't used during his time on the streets. The phone powered on slowly, revealing dozens of missed calls and urgent text messages from his executive assistant, his security team, and his lawyer. The business crisis that had extended his reality check experiment now demanded his attention. With practiced efficiency, Edwin dialed a number from memory. It's me, he said when the call connected. I'm ready to come back. Send a car. He provided the address, adding, and James. Make it discreet. No company logos, no uniforms. Within 30 minutes, a nondescript black sedan pulled up outside the apartment building. Edwin gathered his few belongings, leaving the borrowed clothes neatly folded on the bed. In their place, he left a handwritten note. Sarah, your kindness to a stranger is something I won't forget. Sometimes the universe has a way of balancing accounts. Lock your door and trust your instincts, they are clearly excellent. With sincere gratitude. Edward. After a moment's hesitation, he placed something else beside the note, his seemingly worthless plastic hospital bracelet from when he'd visited the free clinic for a tetanus shot after cutting his hand on a rusted fence. The bracelet showed only his first name and a patient number, but it was something tangible, a small memento of their brief connection. As the car pulled away from the curb, Edwin glanced back at the rundown apartment building, memorizing its address. His driver, James, remained silent, having learned years ago that his boss valued privacy after these annual disappearances. The office? James finally asked as they approached downtown. No, Edwin decided. Home first. I need to shed this disguise before anyone recognizes me. 3 hours later, Edwin Whitmore strode into the gleaming headquarters of Whitmore Enterprises, his transformation complete. Gone was the bearded, disheveled vagrant. In his place stood a commanding figure in a perfectly tailored suit, silver hair precisely cut, his expression inscrutable behind designer glasses. His appearance in the executive suite caused a ripple of relief among his staff. His executive assistant, Meredith, immediately began updating him on the crisis that had been unfolding in his absence. The Archer Group increased their offer yesterday, she reported, falling into step beside him as he moved toward his office. They are now proposing a hostile takeover at $43 per share. The board is divided. Mr. Harrington is advocating for acceptance of the offer. Edwin nodded, processing the information while simultaneously noting how quickly everyone had adjusted to his return, as if his 3-week absence had been nothing more than an inconvenience rather than the profound experience it had been. "Schedule an emergency board meeting for this afternoon," he instructed, settling behind his imposing desk. "And get me the files on our downtown properties. All of them." Meredith blinked in surprise. "The downtown properties? I thought the crisis with Archer would be your priority." "It is," Edwin assured her. "But I've had some insights during my absence. Trust me, Meredith." As his assistant hurried to fulfill his requests, Edwin turned to his computer, quickly locating an address in the property records. As he suspected, Sarah's apartment building was owned by a subsidiary of one of his investment groups, a detail that would have remained invisible to him had he not experienced its deteriorating conditions firsthand. The irony struck him forcefully. While he had been cultivating his public image as a philanthropist, people like Sarah were living in substandard conditions in buildings his company controlled. The disconnect between his stated values and the reality was stark and uncomfortable. By the time the board meeting convened that afternoon, Edwin had formulated a plan, one that would address both the immediate threat from the Archer Group and the deeper issues his time on the streets had revealed. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began, taking his place at the head of the polished mahogany table. "I appreciate your handling of matters during my absence. Before we address the Archer proposal, I want to announce a new initiative effective immediately." The board members exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for Edwin's unexpected direction. "Our company owns 37 residential properties in economically disadvantaged areas of this city," Edwin continued, his voice steady. "As of today, we are establishing a $50 million fund for immediate improvements to those properties, with priority given to safety issues like elevator repairs, security systems, and heating upgrades." Harold Harrington, Edwin's longest-serving board member, leaned forward with a frown. "With all due respect, Edwin, this hardly seems the moment for charitable initiatives. We are facing a serious threat from Archer." "This isn't charity, Harold," Edwin replied calmly. "It's strategy. The Archer Group is targeting us because they perceive us as all profit, no purpose. They are right. We've lost sight of our founding mission to elevate communities through economic opportunity. This initiative isn't just the right thing to do, it's a powerful statement to our shareholders that we are rededicating ourselves to sustainable, community-centered growth." Sarah quickly changed into her cleaning uniform, gulped down a sandwich, and headed back out for her second job, unaware that across town, a man she knew only as Edward was setting in motion events that would soon collide with her carefully structured world. Within the walls of her office building, sitting at his desk long after his staff had departed for the evening, Edwin Whitmore III studied a file his private investigator had compiled on Sarah Matthews in remarkable time. The details painted a picture both heartbreaking and inspiring. Orphaned at 19, when her parents died in a car crash, she had fought for custody of her siblings rather than seeing them separated in foster care. She maintained a 3.8 GPA in her part-time studies despite working over 60 hours a week. Her rent had been late twice in the past year, but never unpaid. Edwin closed the file, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. The contrast between Sarah's circumstances and his own wealth felt obscene now in a way it never had before. His annual reality check experiment had always ended with donations to homeless shelters and soup kitchens, performative gestures that had allowed him to return to his privileged life with his conscience soothed. This time would be different. This time, the payment for kindness would be genuine change, not just for Sarah, but for all the invisible people struggling in buildings his company owned, working jobs that paid too little, fighting systems designed to keep them trapped. Edwin reached for his phone, dialing the number of his most trusted attorney. "Richard," he said when the call connected. "I need you to set up a meeting tomorrow with Lawrence Chen, the bookstore magnate." Richard sounded surprised. "I thought Whitmore Enterprises was moving away from retail investments." "This is personal," Edwin replied. "And completely confidential. No paperwork until I say so." As night settled over the city, Sarah cleaned empty offices by the dim light of her headphones, playing an audiobook, a business text for her current class. She moved methodically from desk to desk, dusting and vacuuming, unaware that one of those desks belonged to Edwin Whitmore III, the man she knew only as Edward, the homeless stranger she had welcomed into her home. And as the hands of the clock ticked toward midnight, both Sarah and Edwin, in their separate worlds yet connected by a single act of kindness, stood on the precipice of changes neither could fully imagine, changes that would test their characters, challenge their assumptions, and ultimately reveal that the true payment for kindness is not measured in dollars, but in the courage to see the world through another's eyes. The universe had indeed begun balancing accounts, just as Edward's note had suggested. But the ledger was far from settled. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor to Whitmore Enterprises. Lawrence Chen, founder of Boundless Books, arrived precisely at 9 for his meeting with Edwin. The two men had crossed paths at charity events, but had never done business together, making the summons both unusual and intriguing. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Edwin said, ushering the bookstore owner into his private conference room rather than his imposing office. The more intimate setting seemed appropriate for what he had in mind. Lawrence, a thoughtful man in his 60s with kind eyes behind round spectacles, studied Edwin with gentle curiosity. "Your assistant mentioned this was a personal matter." "It is," Edwin confirmed, pouring coffee for them both. "I've been following your community scholars program with interest. Particularly how you identify promising employees and provide them with educational mentorship alongside employment that accommodates their studies." Lawrence nodded, accepting the coffee. "It's been our most successful initiative. Many of our store managers came through that program. But I suspect you didn't invite me here for a casual discussion about corporate philanthropy." Edwin smiled, appreciating the man's directness. "I'd like to establish a similar program within Whitmore Enterprises, and I need your guidance. But there's more." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "There's someone specific I want to help, but in a way that offers opportunity rather than charity." As Edwin outlined his proposal, Lawrence's expression shifted from polite interest to genuine engagement. By the time they shook hands an hour later, a partnership had been formed that would change not just Sarah's life, but potentially hundreds of others. Sarah's phone rang as she rushed between classes, her backpack heavy with textbooks. The number was unfamiliar, but she answered anyway, hoping it wasn't another bill collector. "Ms. Matthews. This is Elaine Winters from Boundless Books corporate office. Do you have a moment?" Sarah ducked into a quiet corner of the hallway, confused. "Yes, but I think there's been a mistake. I haven't applied for a position with Boundless Books. Actually, your name was referred to us by a community partner. Your educational background and work experience match perfectly with our Community Scholars Program. We'd like to interview you for a management trainee position, full benefits, tuition assistance, and hours that work around your class schedule." Sarah nearly dropped her phone, certain this was either a mistake or an elaborate scam. "I'm sorry, but how did you get my information? Who referred me?" There was a brief pause. "The referral came through the Whitmore Foundation, but I'm afraid I don't have the specific name. Would you be interested in learning more about the position?" 20 minutes later, Sarah sat stunned on a bench outside her classroom, having scheduled an interview for the following day. The opportunity seemed heaven-sent, exactly what she needed to stabilize her family's situation while continuing her education. Yet something about it raised questions. The timing, coming so soon after Edward's departure, felt like more than coincidence. She reached into her bag, pulling out the plastic hospital bracelet he had left behind. For the first time, she examined it closely, noting the patient number and the name, Edwin W. A suspicion began forming in her mind. When Sarah arrived for her interview at Boundless Books' downtown headquarters the next morning, she was led not to the HR department, but to a sunlit conference room where two people awaited her, Elaine Winters from HR and Lawrence Chen himself, the founder whose story Sarah had read about in one of her business classes. Ms. Matthews, Lawrence greeted her warmly. "Thank you for coming in on such short notice." The interview proceeded conventionally at first, questions about her experience, her education, her goals. Sarah responded thoughtfully, trying to ignore the lingering feeling that something unusual was happening. Near the end, Lawrence set aside his notes. "Sarah, I'll be direct. This position was created with you specifically in mind. You come highly recommended by someone who believes in your potential." "Someone named Edwin, perhaps?" Sarah asked quietly. Lawrence's slight hesitation told her everything. "I'm not at liberty to discuss our program's benefactors," he said carefully. "But the opportunity is genuine, regardless of how it came about. The position is yours if you want it." Sarah took a deep breath. "I'd like to think about it overnight, if that's all right. This is a big decision." "Of course," Lawrence agreed, sliding a business card across the table. "Call me directly with your decision." Outside the Boundless Books building, Sarah pulled out her phone, searching Edwin W. alongside Whitmore Foundation and Whitmore Enterprises. Within seconds, she was staring at a corporate headshot of the man she had known as Edward, clean-shaven, impeccably dressed, but with the same thoughtful eyes that had thanked her for a simple meal. Edwin Whitmore III. Billionaire CEO. Philanthropist. The man who had slept on her second-hand couch. Disbelief gave way to a complex mixture of emotions: betrayal at the deception, amazement at the unlikely connection, and something harder to define. Was this gesture arranging a job that could change her life's trajectory, a genuine attempt to help, or was it just conscience money, a rich man's way of settling a debt? 3 days passed with no word from Sarah. Edwin had promised himself he wouldn't check, wouldn't interfere further, but by the 4th day, his resolve crumbled. A discreet call to Lawrence confirmed his fear. Sarah had neither accepted nor declined the position. "Give her time," Lawrence advised. "This isn't just about employment for someone in her position, it's about pride, independence, and trust." Edwin knew Lawrence was right, but he couldn't shake the image of Sarah's tired eyes as she prepared lunches for her siblings, her quiet determination as she juggled responsibilities that would crush most people. He had meant his intervention as a bridge to opportunity, not as charity that might offend her dignity. That evening, as Edwin's driver navigated through the city toward his penthouse, Edwin made a spontaneous decision. "James, take me to Green Street. The apartment building where you picked me up last week." The driver's eyes met Edwin's in the rearview mirror. "Are you sure that's wise, sir?" "No," Edwin admitted. "But it's necessary." Sarah was helping Max with his science project when the knock came. Opening the door, she found Edwin Whitmore standing in her hallway, wearing a simple sweater and jeans rather than either the ragged clothes of Edward or the power suit of the CEO she had seen in online photos. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. Sarah hesitated, then stepped aside, calling to her siblings. Max, Lily, take the project to your room for a few minutes, okay? Once they were alone, silence stretched between them until both spoke at once. I should have been honest. You weren't really homeless. They stopped, a reluctant smile tugging at Sarah's lips despite her confusion. Edwin gestured for her to continue. You weren't really homeless, she repeated. Why the deception? Was it some kind of social experiment? Slumming with the poor for kicks? The harshness in her tone made Edwin wince. Nothing like that, he said, choosing his words with care. For the past 5 years, I've spent 3 weeks each year living on the streets, no money, no phone, no identity. It helps me understand the reality of people my company's decisions affect. And this time you ended up on my doorstep, Sarah concluded, her expression unreadable. Yes. And your kindness changed something in me. Edwin moved to the window, looking out at the neighborhood he now knew his company had neglected. The job offer wasn't charity, Sarah. It was recognition of your potential, your work ethic. Something you've earned through years of sacrifice. Sarah crossed her arms, studying him. And what about all the other Sarahs in this building? In this neighborhood? Do they all get personal interventions from Edwin Whitmore? The question struck home. No, he admitted. They don't. But that's changing too. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a folded newspaper article. This was published this morning. Sarah took it, scanning the headline, Whitmore Enterprises announces $50 million community investment initiative. The article detailed plans for renovations to affordable housing properties, expanded educational opportunities for employees, and partnerships with local businesses, including a feature on the collaboration with Boundless Books. This is because of me? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because of what you showed me, Edwin corrected. One act of kindness revealed the disconnect between who I claimed to be and the reality of how my company operated. You showed me what true generosity looks like, giving when you have little to spare. Sarah sank onto the couch, the newspaper article still in her hands. So the job offer is legitimate. No strings, no special treatment once you're hired. Just a fair chance that accommodates your education and family responsibilities. Edwin remained standing, respecting her space. You can say no. Your pride is valid, Sarah. But consider whether that pride serves your siblings, your future. Before Sarah could respond, the apartment door opened, and Max burst in, excited about an idea for his science project. He stopped short at the sight of their visitor. Hey, you're the guy from last week. You look way cleaner now. Edwin laughed despite the tension. Yes, I am. How's the science project going? And just like that, the atmosphere shifted. Max excitedly explained his project about renewable energy, and Edwin listened with genuine interest, offering suggestions that reflected both his business knowledge and environmental concerns. Soon Lily joined them, initially shy but quickly warming to the conversation. Sarah watched the interaction, seeing not the billionaire CEO, but glimpses of Edward, the thoughtful man who had helped fold laundry and wash dishes without being asked. The man who had seen her, truly seen her, when most people looked right through her. 2 weeks later, Edwin stood in the newly established Community Development Office of Whitmore Enterprises, reviewing blueprints for renovations to Sarah's apartment building, the first of many scheduled for improvements. The initiative had generated positive press, but more importantly, it had begun shifting the company's internal culture. Employees who had long felt disconnected from the company's impact were volunteering for community outreach programs, offering their professional skills to residents in Whitmore-owned properties. His assistant interrupted his thoughts. "Ms. Matthews is here to see you." Sarah entered, more confidently than Edwin might have expected, dressed professionally but simply. She had accepted the position at Boundless Books, starting the following week. "Thank you for seeing me," she said once they were alone. "I wanted to deliver this in person." She handed him an envelope containing the key he had left her, and, to his surprise, the plastic hospital bracelet. "I am keeping neither charity nor souvenirs," she explained, noticing his questioning look. "But I am accepting the job because Lawrence convinced me it's a genuine opportunity, not a handout." Edwin accepted the envelope with a nod. "That's all I wanted it to be." "I have one condition," Sarah continued, her voice steady. "I want to be part of your community initiative, specifically the educational outreach. The people in my building, my neighborhood, they don't need saviors, Mr. Whitmore. They need structural change and genuine opportunity." Edwin studied her, this remarkable young woman, who had offered shelter to a stranger and now stood before a billionaire with unwavering dignity, negotiating not for herself, but for her community. "Edwin," he corrected gently. "And yes, we need exactly that perspective on the committee. Though I should warn you, combining work, school, and community service won't be easy." Sarah smiled for the first time since entering his office. "Nothing worthwhile ever is." 1 year later. The community center on the ground floor of Sarah's renovated apartment building hummed with activity. What had once been abandoned retail space now housed educational programs, a small library, and meeting rooms where residents gathered to discuss neighborhood improvements with Whitmore Enterprise representatives. Sarah moved through the space with purpose, having just finished teaching a financial literacy workshop. Her life had transformed dramatically over the past year. Her position at Boundless Books had led to a full scholarship to complete her business degree, and her siblings were thriving in a stable environment with better schools and opportunities. In a quiet corner of the center, Edwin sat in conversation with an elderly resident discussing heating issues in her unit. Gone was the artificial distance that had once characterized his community interactions. These monthly visits had become genuine dialogues rather than photo opportunities. As the event wound down, Sarah and Edwin found themselves helping volunteers stack chairs. "The board still thinks you're doing this for the publicity," Sarah remarked, continuing their ongoing conversation about corporate social responsibility. Edwin shrugged. "Let them. The quarterly reports speak for themselves. Turns out that treating people with dignity and investing in communities is good business. And good for the soul," Sarah suggested with a knowing look. "That too," Edwin admitted. "Though I've retired my homeless alter ego. These days I prefer a more transparent approach." They completed their task in companionable silence, their relationship having evolved into a unique friendship, not quite peers, given their different circumstances, but bound by mutual respect and a shared vision. "Will we see you at Max's science fair next week?" Sarah asked as they prepared to leave. He's counting on his business consultant to help field questions. "I wouldn't miss it," Edwin promised. "Though I'm still waiting for Lily to let me see her college application essay." Sarah laughed. "She says you'll try to make it too perfect. But she'll come around." Outside, as evening settled over the neighborhood, they paused on the sidewalk. The street looked different now. Trees had been planted, facades repaired, security lighting installed. Small changes that signaled larger transformations taking place. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked suddenly. taking me in that night. Your life might be much simpler if you'd never knocked on my door. Edwin considered the question seriously. Simpler, yes. But emptier. He gazed at the community center with its warm lights and departing residents. I spent decades accumulating wealth while telling myself I was making a difference through occasional charity. You showed me the difference between writing checks and creating change. And you showed me that accepting help isn't surrendering dignity, Sarah acknowledged. That sometimes the bravest thing is to let someone else share your burden. A car pulled up Edwin's driver, right on schedule. Before leaving, Edwin extended his hand formally, as he had at their first meeting in his office a year ago. Thank you, Sarah Matthews. She took his hand with a smile. For what? For the true payment for kindness, the chance to become a better version of myself. As Edwin's car pulled away, Sarah remained on the sidewalk for a moment, watching it disappear around the corner. Then she turned toward the building that was no longer just a place she struggled to afford, but a home and a community being transformed from within. The universe had indeed balanced accounts, not through simple exchanges of help given and received, but through the more profound currency of lives changed, perspectives shifted, and possibilities created. The ledger between Edwin Whitmore and Sarah Matthews had evolved beyond debits and credits into something far more valuable, a template for genuine change. In the end, both had given and both had received. And in that balance lay the true payment for kindness.